Welcome back, everyone. Today we're diving into something that's close to all of our hearts, or at least our garages: vehicle safety.
That's right. We often take it for granted, but ensuring our vehicles are safe is a huge responsibility, not just for ourselves, but for everyone else on the road.
Absolutely. You shared some fascinating excerpts from a vehicle safety guide with me. Honestly, it's made me realize there's a lot more to it than just, kicking the tires and checking the oil.
You hit the nail on the head. It's easy to think of vehicle inspections as just another chore, or even worse, like a bureaucratic hoop to jump through. But this guide really drives home the point that it's about safety first and foremost.
It really does. The guide even mentions that even seemingly minor defects can spiral into major breakdowns or even scarier, accidents.
Ah,
It's like if you ignore a wobbly chair leg for too long, eventually that chair is going to give out.
exactly. Regular vehicle checks are essentially preventative health care for your car. And just like with our own health, a little maintenance goes a long way in preventing bigger problems down the road.
Okay, that analogy totally makes sense. So besides this whole preventative care thing, the guide also delves into the legal side of things, right? Like there are actual laws about vehicle inspection.
You bet. It's not just a suggestion. Both federal and state laws mandate vehicle inspections. And here's the kicker. These laws apply not just to drivers, but also to officials who might need to inspect vehicles.
Wow. I didn't realize it was that official. So it's not just about avoiding a ticket, it's about making sure your vehicle meets safety standards, period.
Precisely. And if a vehicle is deemed unsafe, it can be taken out of service until the necessary repairs are made. Talk about an incentive to stay on top of your inspections, right?
Yeah. That's a pretty big deal. Speaking of inspections, the guide breaks things down into three main types: pre-trip, during trip, and after trip. And as someone who sometimes rushes out the door with just a quick glance at my gas gauge, I have to ask, what's involved in each of these inspections?
It's a great question, and I think you'll be surprised by the level of detail involved. Let's start with the pre-trip inspection, your most comprehensive checkup.
Okay, let's unpack that one first. What makes it so comprehensive?
Well, this guide actually lays out a very specific seven-step method for the pre-trip inspection, which we'll get into in a bit. It's way more involved than I ever would have thought.
7 steps. It's starting to sound like we're performing surgery here, not inspecting a car.
Huh, you're not far off. Think of it like a pilot going through their pre-flight checklist.
Yeah.
It might seem meticulous, but it ensures everything's in top shape before you take off.
That's a good point. Okay, so what about during the trip? Are we supposed to be doing a full 7 step inspection every time we get behind the wheel?
Not exactly. The during trip inspection is less about a full-blown checkup and more about staying vigilant, using your senses to pick up on anything unusual.
So, like, if I hear a strange noise or smell something burning, I should probably pull over and investigate.
Exactly. The guide emphasizes using all of your senses: sight, hearing, smell, even touch. It's about becoming attuned to your vehicle and recognizing when something feels off.
Touch. What, like, am I supposed to be feeling up my tires while driving down the highway?
Well, maybe not while you're on the highway, but you can definitely be aware of any vibrations or changes in your steering that might signal a problem.
Okay, I'm starting to realize I need to be paying a lot more attention to my car. So we've covered pre-trip and during trip. What about after the trip? Is that where I confess all the weird noises I ignored while driving?
Well, not quite. The after-trip inspection is more about documenting anything you notice during your drive for potential repair. For commercial drivers, this usually involves a formal written report. But even for us everyday folks, it's a good idea to make a mental note of any issues.
That makes sense. So if I felt my car pulling to one side or heard a funny rattle, I should probably get that checked out sooner rather than later, right?
Exactly. Just like those minor aches and pains we tend to ignore, addressing small issues early on can prevent them from turning into major and expensive problems down the road.
Okay, so we've touched on the why of vehicle inspections, but before we jump into the nitty-gritty of what to actually inspect, I have to ask, what's the connection to the CDL test that's mentioned in the guide?
Ah, good catch.
Yeah.
That's a perfect segue into our next point. So we're back in the driver's seat ready to test those brakes. First up, the parking brake.
All right, let's put this parking brake through its paces. What's the protocol?
Engage the parking brake,
Yeah.
put the vehicle in low gear, and then gently try to pull forward.
Gently being the operative word here. We're not trying to win any drag races.
Exactly. The goal is to see if that parking brake holds. If you can feel the vehicle moving or if it rolls easily, your parking brake needs attention.
Makes sense. It's like that moment you realize your beach chair is sinking into the sand. Time for an adjustment. So, parking brake. Checked. What about the service brake?
For the service brake, you'll want to get up to about 5 miles per hour and then firmly apply the brakes. Pay close attention to how the pedal feels and how the vehicle responds. Does it stop smoothly?
Okay, so I'm feeling for any weirdness in the pedals, sponginess, resistance, that sort of thing.
Exactly. And you're also listening for any unusual noises and feeling for any pulling to one side.
Pulling to one side, that can't be a good sign.
Not usually. It can indicate an issue with your brake calipers or wheel cylinders. Definitely something you'd want a mechanic to look at. And of course, if you experience a delayed response when you hit the brakes, that's a major red flag.
Okay, noted. No ignoring delayed brake responses. So after this rigorous 7-step inspection, we're finally good to go, right? We've checked everything from the engine oil to the taillights.
If you've addressed any issues you found along the way, then yes, you're ready to hit the road safely and confidently. But remember, this 7-step inspection is just the pre-trip check.
Oh, right. I almost forgot about those during trip and after trip checks we talked about earlier. They almost slipped my mind after that epic 7-step inspection.
I hear you. It's a lot to remember, but that's why we're doing this deep dive, to make sure you're armed with all the knowledge you need to stay safe on the road.
Well, consider me armed and almost ready. But before we shift gears to those other inspections, you mentioned earlier that something in the guide about air brakes really piqued your interest.
Oh yes, air brakes. Now those are fascinating.
All right, I'm intrigued. Spill the beans. What's so special about air brakes?
Well, as I briefly mentioned before, air brakes are a whole other ball game compared to the hydraulic brakes found in most cars. Instead of using hydraulic fluid to create braking pressure, they use compressed air.
Compressed air. That sounds incredibly complex. Why go through all that trouble? Why not just stick with hydraulics?
Because when you're dealing with massive vehicles, like semi-trucks and buses, you need some serious stopping power. Air brakes are much more robust and reliable than hydraulic brakes, making them ideal for handling the weight and momentum of those behemoths.
Okay, that makes sense. I guess when you're hauling tons of cargo, you don't want to mess around with wimpy brakes. So if air brakes are so different from hydraulic brakes, I'm assuming their inspection process is pretty different too.
You are right on the money. The guide actually suggests referring to other sections for information on inspecting air brakes, which tells me it's a whole other level of complexity.
Wow, air brake inspections sound like a deep dive for another episode. But for now, let's get back to those during trip and after trip checks for us, regular folks, with our regular hydraulic brakes.
Sounds like a plan. So during trip checks, they're all about staying vigilant and using your senses to pick up on any potential issues while you're on the road.
Right, we talked about that earlier. It's all about being present and aware while driving, not just zoning out to our favorite podcasts.
Exactly. It's about paying attention to any new or unusual sounds, keeping an eye on those gauges for any sudden changes, and even being mindful of smells. For instance, is that a normal new car smell, or something actually burning under the hood?
And what about touch? You mentioned using all of our senses. Am I supposed to be like patting my dashboard and whispering sweet nothings to my car while I'm driving?
Well, maybe save the sweet nothings for later, but you can definitely be aware of things like vibrations in the steering wheel or any inconsistencies in how the car handles. It's about developing a feel for your vehicle.
It's like that sixth sense you develop when you've spent a lot of time with someone. You just know when something's off.
You said it. The more in tune you are with your vehicle, the quicker you'll notice when something feels amiss.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the after-trip inspection.
Okay, so the after-trip inspection. This is where we reflect on our journey and confess all the strange noises and weird smells we may have encountered along the way, right?
Well, not exactly confess, but definitely document. Now, for commercial drivers, this often involves a formal written report detailing any issues encountered during the trip. But even for everyday drivers, it's good practice to do a quick mental review after each trip.
So I should be asking myself things like, did anything feel off during the drive? Or did I hear any concerning clumps or rattles?
Exactly. And if the answer to any of those questions is yes, it's best to get it checked out sooner rather than later. Remember, those seemingly small issues can quickly escalate into major problems if ignored.
It's like that old saying, a stitch in time saves 9. Or in this case, a quick trip to the mechanic saves a whole lot of hassle and money down the road.
You got it. Speaking of potential hassles, remember those red flags we talked about earlier? The things that can quickly turn a minor inconvenience into a major safety hazard?
Oh, right. Those red flags are like the warning signs in a horror movie. You know something bad is about to happen.
Exactly. And just like in those movies, ignoring the signs won't make the danger go away.
Okay, you've got my attention. Let's talk about these red flags What should we be on the lookout for?
Well, the guide goes into great detail about the specific things to check during each inspection, and it's packed with fascinating insights. For example, did you know that even something as seemingly simple as mismatched tire sizes can be dangerous?
Wait, really? I thought as long as the tires fit on the car, it was all good.
Not quite. You see, mismatched tire sizes, or even mixing radial and bias ply tires, which, by the way, are two different types of tire construction, can throw off your car's handling and lead to uneven wear and tear on your tires.
Wow. I had no idea. See, this is why I love our deep dives. I always learn something new. So, besides mismatched tires, what other red flags should we be aware of?
Well, the guide mentions a few other things that I found particularly interesting.
All right, I'm all ears. Lay those fascinating facts on me. Right. I'm all ears. Lay those fascinating facts on me.
Well, for starters, it emphasizes checking your tire tread depth. You might be thinking, okay, so my tires need to have tread. Got it. But did you know there are specific measurements for safe tread depth?
Hold on, there are actual numbers involved. I thought it was more of a if you can see Lincoln's head, you're good kind of situation.
That's a classic. But seriously, using a tread depth gauge to check if your tires meet the recommended minimum depth can be the difference between safe stopping distances and a scary slide into oncoming traffic, especially in wet conditions.
Yikes. Okay, you've officially convinced me to invest in a tread depth gauge. What else does the guide highlight?
The guide goes on to stress the importance of checking your lights, and not just whether they turn on or off. It goes deep on things like ensuring your headlights are properly aimed and making sure those side marker lights are the correct color.
Wait, the color of my side marker lights matters.
You bet. Those seemingly insignificant lights play a crucial role in making your vehicle visible to others, at night and during inclement weather. And speaking of visibility, those windshield wipers we talked about earlier, the guide emphasizes that they're not just for aesthetics. They need to be in good working order to ensure clear visibility in a downpour.
Okay, that one's a no-brainer. Nothing scarier than driving in a rainstorm with wipers that sound like a dying cat. But I have to admit, this guide has made me realize that I've been taking a lot of things for granted when it comes to vehicle safety.
And that's the beauty of a deep dive. We uncover all those hidden layers of knowledge that might not be immediately obvious. It's about going beyond the surface and truly understanding the why behind those seemingly mundane maintenance tasks.
It's like realizing that cleaning out your dryer vent is not just about efficiency, it's about preventing a potential fire hazard. Suddenly, those chores seem a lot more important.
Exactly. And speaking of important, remember those loose exhaust pipes I mentioned earlier?
The ones that could be rubbing against other parts.
Yeah.
Yeah, that definitely sounded like a recipe for disaster.
Exactly. The guide points out that a loose exhaust pipe isn't just noisy, it can lead to dangerous exhaust fumes leaking into your vehicle. And we all know that carbon monoxide is no joke.
Okay, that's definitely going on my list of things to check ASAP. So besides tire tread, lights, wipers, and exhaust pipes, are there any other red flags we should be aware of?
The guide emphasizes checking for things like worn-out brake pads, cracked hoses, and even something as seemingly minor as a loose gas cap, all of which can have significant safety implications if ignored.
Wow, who knew a loose gas cap could be a safety hazard?
It's true. A loose gas cap can not only decrease your fuel efficiency, but also allow dangerous fumes to escape. Not good for you or the environment. It's all connected.
This whole conversation has been a real eye-opener. I feel like I need to go back and reread my car's entire owner's manual now.
You know what? That's not a bad idea. But for now, just remember the key takeaway from this deep dive. Vehicle safety is not just about passing an inspection or avoiding a ticket. It's about taking responsibility for the well-being of yourself, your passengers, and everyone else on the road.
Beautifully said. And on that note, dear listeners, we've reached the end of our deep dive into vehicle safety. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the importance of those pre-trip, during-trip, and after-trip inspections to the fascinating world of air brakes.
And remember, this is just the beginning. We've given you the tools and knowledge to become more informed and proactive drivers.
Exactly. So the next time you hit the road, take a moment to appreciate the complexity of your vehicle, pay attention to those subtle cues, and never hesitate to ask questions or seek professional help when needed.
Because ultimately, the best way to stay safe on the road is to stay informed and stay curious.
And on that note, from all of us here at The Deep Dive, drive safely, and we'll catch you next time.